Activity number 1. Part of the first, which is the first activity in what we call uncovering the hidden power of social situations. The major outcome of this activity, it's called What Would You Do?, is essentially to get kids to jump into a hypothetical situation and to warm them up for, okay, I'm in a situation, how does it affect me personally? The instructions are essentially, we want you to get into groups of 3, so get into your groups right now. And Brian Dickerson, who is our Associate Director of Education and Research, will walk you through activity number 1, What Would You Do?
Okay, everybody. So the first thing I'd like you to do is just close your eyes for a moment, take a couple deep breaths, and imagine the situation as I describe it. So it's the end of a long day at school. You've just left your last class. You're on your way out to the parking lot. And you actually, on your way out to your car or towards your ride home or however you get home, you see a woman lying on the sidewalk, motionless. Now, it's a busy day. There are people all around. You can actually see a couple of the people have already noticed this lady. They've looked at her a couple of times. But no one seems to have jumped forward and got involved. I mean, you take just a second, to observe for a little while longer, and she continues to lie motionless, and no one continues to help. I'd like for you personally, for a moment, to think about 2 things before you begin to discuss with your groups. What do you think you would do? And what do you think most people would do? So take a moment to reflect, and then in just a second, go ahead and write down if you'd like to, or begin to discuss with your groups. I'll give you a cue to discuss with your groups, but take another 30 seconds or so just to think about it. You can go ahead and start to gently converse with your groups.
Notice it. Everybody's busy day. Everybody's going on. And then notice. Well, let's just keep going. Yeah, I know. And I was struggling. It's an internal struggle with myself. And I actually, I turned it down. Like 3 cars down the bike. And of course in my head, voice. You know what you need to do right now. I'm looking down through all the cars, like, just thinking to myself, come on, move. Come on, give me a side. She never did. So I was about to leave, and I eventually. Good, I just yelled at myself. And then I went down there and knocked on the door, and yelled in the window, and where should I move? And eventually, after about really loud knocks on the window, I'm like, right, it's over here. I didn't mean that for obviously her husband. But she was like super. It was funny. It was rewarding because she was like, oh, this is sweet. Okay, thank you for being knowing the history, knowing, and yet still
what I find interesting about that is when you have like a little kid, like anytime you see a kid passed out, everyone does it.
they make an action. The second, it's like, no, depends on the person. If you have like an at-risk population, or something like that.
But you know, that goes both ways. I mean, if you see a homeless person, looks like that, you just assume, obviously, it's just an assumption.
Like I know, like I've gone to the bus stop and it's like you want to stay out there for clearly a homeless person laying on the ground in the grass. You're gonna wait for a second. They're sleeping or are they? Yeah, so it's
If I go and wake you up, you can stop and yell at me for waking you up. Yeah, I'm supposed to say, it's so late, so I thank you for this.
And take maybe another 60 to 90 seconds to finish up.
Yeah, I set that up. Yeah, Kevin. Did I tell you that?
It's interesting if somebody sleeps on campus who enters the stage like they are I mean, there's especially finals week times. It's like people all over slash everywhere. Like they are sleep everywhere. So you just kind of seriously
Yeah. It's not just one morning wall. Or in the grass. Right. A cell phone.
All right. Why don't we take a few minutes and go around the room and actually have a couple of the groups share what you talked about. So who would like to share first? We got it now? So who would like to share? Like we're going to go around to a few groups, but who would like to start? Thank you. Thank you very much.
Sure. It's the interesting situation because this actually did truly happen to me. Even as a trained social psychologist, I still struggled with it. A few years ago, I went to the post office, and there was a woman, elderly woman, in her car, just sitting in front, and she kind of had her eyes closed and her mouth open, and just leaning back and looking like she was quite dead. And I walking by, and kind of saw her out of the corner of my eye, and there's 10 people everywhere moving, and no one doing anything about it, of course. And being a trained social psychologist, I still kind of looked at her with that, is this an emergency question? And I wasn't sure. Because I wasn't sure, I kind of kept on going. But in the back of my head, it was still kind of, that might not be right. Did my business in the post office and came out, and she hadn't moved one bit. So I kind of really knew, okay, I should check in. I should check in. But I still, because there were so many people, just kept moving, still had that urge to not get involved. Went all the way to my car, like 4 spots down, sat in my car with it running, looking down the windows, begging in my head for this woman to move or show any sign of life. And she didn't. And then eventually I yelled at myself and said, you know what to do, get out of the car, go check on her. And I did. Finally I did. I walked down, I pounded on the window, and, ma'am, are you okay? And she didn't move. Actually really gave me a good scare. I was about to get my phone out, start calling 911, pound on the window again, and then I woke her up. And and it was a big gasp, like, oh, thank you. And she was extremely kind about it. She was really thankful. Her husband was inside doing some business. And she's like, oh, you're so kind. Thank you for checking in on me. And it ended up being a very rewarding experience. But then at the end, I felt like such a schmuck as a trained social psychologist. And I still had that internal struggle. And it's easy to sit in a group and talk about it. It's so much more challenging when you're actually really in that situation.
Absolutely. Either one of you. Who else would be willing to share? And thank you so much for being willing to share, especially a story of a time you didn't just jump right in. That's not always easy to do, so we appreciate it. How about over from this group? Somebody care?
both her hand was raised.
Oh, I didn't see it. Thank you so much. And catch me on that kind of stuff. If I miss something, let me know.
I think the thing that we were talking about is it depends. I know you had mentioned that you're walking, or Brian had mentioned that this is as you're walking to your car or waiting for your ride or whatever, but in the scenario it says as you leave campus. So that kind of leaves it open to, well, am I driving? Am I in my car stuck in traffic and I noticed it on the sidewalk, which I'd probably more likely be willing to just keep going with the flow of traffic instead of stop and cause all these people to start honking and things like that. But then, you know, the situation might be different. If you're literally physically right next to them, walking past them, then you have to do, you know, get yourself to keep walking past them, and they're right there on the ground, you know. So I think it really depends on your situation, whether you'd help in that situation.
So if there was a lady on the ground and you were walking by her, how do you think you might respond, or do you have an idea?
Well, I know we were saying, you know, it's really easy to say, yeah, I would help. I do try to help people as much as I possibly can. But, you know, again, it's about the situation. What area am I in? Where, you know, do I feel comfortable here? Am I, you know, a new person to the area and I don't really know the place very much? Again, I think there's all these different factors that kind of play into that also.
And that's a great answer. The ability of you to be able to be nuanced about that and to be honest that you might not automatically do what we think is the right thing, that lets you know that you need to be more mindful. So, I mean, that's great that you're willing to admit that you don't know how you might necessarily respond. And like you were saying, it's not always easy, even when you know what the right thing to do is. So, like, who knows what you'll do? The idea is that the more you're prepared, the better you're trained, the more likely you are to respond in the way that you would want to. But it's not easy, and there's no guarantee.
Well, I think, you know, one thing that really helps me, especially, you know, if I was in this situation, would be, and kind of what I try to tell myself, is that what if they are in serious danger and I don't help, and then I find out later, you know, that this individual ended up dying? How would I feel? You know, I know it's very kind of personal, selfish kind of thinking, but how would I feel? I would feel really guilty that, you know, I didn't do anything, I could have helped, you know. And so I think that's kind of maybe a mindset to keep also is, you know, what if this does go the very worst way possible? How would I feel myself, you know, afterwards, knowing that I could have maybe saved someone and I didn't, you know?
Yeah, that's a great point. And we're not showing it today, but it's part of the materials you'll have at your disposal. But the death of Matthew Carrington during the fraternity hazing that he was involved in is exactly what you're talking about. Those people talk about living with the consequences of not helping and what it is like for them. So I think that's a very good way to motivate yourself, and I think it's a good strategy. Did anybody else? Yeah, great. Fall through the curtain.
So to add on to what she was just mentioning, I feel like I've always been the type of person that stands up for other people ever since I was a very young kid, and other people see that as out of the ordinary, and I always just thought that's what you're supposed to do. And what she was mentioning is what are the ramifications afterwards? And I try to make sure that even if it's an emergency or not, to always go in saying, I'm going to help that person no matter what. And I think a lot of the reasons people don't get involved is because it's socially awkward. So if someone's just sleeping in their car, it's kind of embarrassing knocking on their door and making this huge ruckus about it when they're honestly just taking a nap. But my kind of takeaway and what I like to tell people is, so what? At least you tried. And it's okay if you're a little socially awkward, and it's okay if you're making a big deal out of nothing. But what if there is an emergency right in front of you? At least you're helping somebody. And if it's not, then you can laugh about it later. But at least you've helped.
Yeah, well said. That's a great point.
Thank you.
Did anybody else care to share? Yeah.
I actually had a similar situation to Mike, and I don't know if this is a testament to HIP, but I had the situation happen after I'd been kind of involved in this organization. And I was actually at the light at Irvine Center Drive in Bronca, and there's 3 straight lanes there and then 2 left turn lanes. And I was in the far left of the straight lanes, and the green light came, and the 2 lanes to the right of me went as normal, and our lane didn't move at all through one set of green light. And then it happened again. And I'm thinking, okay, first time, maybe it's the person was texting, but you don't text through 2 green lights. Something's not right. So there's the first car and then 2 cars and then me. So the first woman looked at the car, or the first woman just drove past the guy, didn't even look to see what was going on. The second person looked in his window and drove away anyway. And I'm thinking, what the heck's going on? I just put my blinker on. I got out of the car like in broad daylight. I walked up there in traffic, and there was an old man that was slumped down in his seat, and he looked like he was sleeping. So I pounded on the window, and it woke him up, and it startled him. He'd fallen asleep with his foot on the brake. So when he woke up, the car started to move because he took his foot off the brake, and then he braked, and then he just looks at me and gets ready to drive away. And I'm like, no, open your window, because I wanted to make sure. I'm like, what is your name? Do you know where you are? Can you breathe? Like, I wanted to make sure he didn't have like a heart attack or a stroke. And he had just fallen asleep. He was okay. I said, I think you need to pull over, maybe wait or call someone. And he did. And so everything was fine. But so that's what I did.
Great. I always want to clap when somebody tells me a story like that, but I'll forego it in this particular. And thank you for watching the coffee. The last thing I would like to say is that when I talk to kids about this, I like to tell them there's a difference between automatically not helping because you never even went through the thought process and deciding not to help. So there are a number of situations, and we'll talk about this more a little bit later, where helping is not a good idea, where you decide it's not worth the time, where it's risky. But to just not help somebody because you automatically decided not to help somebody, I'm not okay with that. So I tell kids, you know, it's okay to not to help. Not helping is wise in a lot of cases, but wouldn't you like to make sure that you're actually doing it because it's a choice you made and not because of an automatic reaction you just picked up along the way? So you don't need it.
So let's step back for a second and be very quick on this part. Any questions on this first activity? Any comments?
Are you guys going to give us questions or scenarios that we can share with the students on when it would be appropriate not to act?
With the bystander effect lesson, especially working with lower income students in some of the lower income areas, we always talk about when it's appropriate to act, when it's not wise to get involved, when people are fighting, when it might have repercussions on you. Like we actually, with every group, it's a critical discussion about how to respond in a wise and safe way for the responder. But we've really felt the need to really flesh that topic out with lower income students who come from dangerous neighborhoods. So yes, absolutely, it's critical. If you don't do it, you're making a mistake.
But aren't there, like, in these situations where it's not wise to help, other ways that you can help if you're not physically stepping in to, you know, break up a fight yourself? There's people that you can call or other ways that you can be involved without physically being involved?
You two are a wonderful team because you just alluded to the second part of that conversation that we have with kids. So it's okay. So maybe it's not wise to jump in. Maybe it's not wise to, you know, block the punch. Maybe it's not wise to say I'm going to call the cops. But what can you do to respond wisely? How can you get help in a good way? How can you check in with an authority figure? That's the exact follow-up to the conversation about not always jumping in. So yes, you're absolutely correct.
And this is a topic that will be unpacked in activities essentially 5 and 6.